Let's go! LSU Arkansas battle. Now the Golden Boot. I understand. This is a rivalry you just roll your eyes over, but it's still pretty crazy that Arkansas is a slight favorite over LSU. So, right up the top here, the big story, Max Johnson or Garrett Nussmeier. Stop! That is not the big story. You are the big story. I'm going to get to meet each and every one of you because this will be the only game I'll be able to attend this year. I'll be at the LSU Greek Amphitheater, 12:30 to 1:30. I want to hang out with you. I know it's strange. It's going to be the first time I get to meet so many of you since we've started this channel. So I hope to see you there. More details at the end of the video. So, once again, the big story is Garrett Nussmeier. Will we see him play quite a bit? Ed Orgeron said that they had the conversation with the father and Garrett. And look, we did a whole video regarding how crazily bad Ed Orgeron handled the situation last week versus Alabama. And you can watch that video up here because it essentially was, to me, one of the craziest decisions Ed Orgeron has made up to this point. Which, let's move on from the Alabama game. But if you want to watch it, it's in the top right corner. Anyway, Garrett Nussmeier was pretty good at the end of the game versus Ole Miss. And quite simply put, Max Johnson has been free falling off a cliff. There's no other way around it. And I like Max Johnson a lot. But right now, he is broken with all these QBRs under 50, which is an analytic to prove that Max Johnson has been below a replacement level quarterback, which is simply unacceptable. Yes, there's plenty of excuses, and a lot of those are valid. Offensive line, wide receivers rotation, play calling, all these different things you could say, but honestly, Max Johnson, if he doesn't play better, you got to replace him, which leads us to this next topic, which are the injuries. LSU will be without both Chasen Hines and Ed Ingram. And look, I find this interesting. The one thing I wish the media did was when Ed Orgeron announced that a player was out, specifically asked Coach, why is he out? Did he get injured at practice? Was there a lingering injury from the game? Because what's interesting is Ed Ingram and Chasen Hines were both healthy at the end of the game. They were boots on the ground all the way up until the final drive. And it was actually Liam Shanahan who had a very vicious injury at the end of the game. And it looks as if Liam will be ready to go. So it's just interesting how some of these injuries have popped up. But the bottom line is they won't be available. Obviously, Anthony Bradford's not there anymore. And the list goes on and on. So, of course, how I think LSU will line up their offensive line will be Cam Wire at left tackle, Dellinger at left guard, Liam at center, Marlon Martinez at right guard, and then at right tackle, Austin Deculus. And the only thing that really stinks about that, obviously you're losing two starters, but LSU has been having a lot of success running what's called an overload and or heavy formation. So what an overload means is you bring in an extra offensive lineman and put that offensive lineman to the right of the right tackle or the left of the left tackle to where you have what's called an unbalanced line. And that is something LSU has had some success running out of recently. So, look, it sucks. They won't be there, and that's not the only injuries. There's a long list of players. Will Cordell Flott be fully healthy and ready to go? We don't know about Sage Ryan. We don't know officially about Mason Smith. We don't know about officially really anyone until the game actually comes. But the bottom line is still, this is the most banged up LSU team I think I've ever seen. I thought last year was bad. This year is way worse. But when it comes to injuries, you got to look at the other side as well. Arkansas is overall a healthier team, but a few weeks ago they lost Jalen Catalon, who is their best defensive player, the star safety. Plays a lot like Eric Reed. Wears the same jersey number as well. He broke his collarbone a few weeks ago, and he will be unavailable. I've covered Arkansas football once during my life, and when Jalen Catalon was coming out of high school, I was like, wow, Arkansas is getting arguably one of their best defensive players of all time. I mean, he really is that impressive. And Arkansas's defense has been in a free fall since then. They've had some really rough performances. Early in the season, they had a lot of sub 5 yard per play games, and recently they have been getting torched, and they were able to hold on at the end versus Mississippi State. So we talk about the coaching matchup in pretty much every game preview piece, and even though Ed Orgeron, Jake Peetz, and especially Durante Jones coached a pretty great game versus Alabama last week, the matchup and the edge probably goes to Arkansas in this one because Sam Pittman has done such a great job with this team. And Kendall Briles and Barry Odom both could be head coaches next year. So, yeah, I think as far as coaching is concerned, Arkansas's probably better in this matchup. But still, LSU, huge step in the right direction with the game plan against Alabama last week. So now we get to the prediction, and as you guys have been looking at the career series between LSU versus Arkansas and the battle for the Golden Boot is quite interesting and historic. There was a decade-long period where 8 of the 9 games were decided by a possession or less, the only of which was the 2011 matchup where LSU was number 1 and Arkansas was number 3, and LSU actually had to come back from a 14-0 deficit. They scored 41 unanswered thanks to the great Tyrann Mathieu. There's so many different things about this matchup that means a lot to me, including Jarvis Landry's legendary performance at Tiger Stadium. 7 catches for 112 yards. I could go into so many different diatribes about what all he did in that game, but still, it was legendary. The most underrated offensive performance I think I've ever seen from an LSU Tiger. And also, personally, this matchup means a lot to me because I grew up in South Arkansas. And what makes it even more fascinating is in South Arkansas, there's a lot of LSU fans. So, yeah, the border, especially with North Louisiana, it's interesting that both of these programs both have strangleholds over the state that they're in because they are the only Power 5 school in each of their states. So, as much as you think LSU dominates the state of Louisiana, Arkansas does as well. I mean, there are Razorback fans throughout the state, and when it comes to this rivalry, the battle of the Golden Boot means so much more to Arkansas fans than it does LSU fans. It's pretty crazy. So even though this rivalry means a lot to some LSU fans, it is without doubt that it means a lot more to Arkansas fans. Now, that doesn't mean that Arkansas is just going to play harder than LSU, but understand that the Golden Boot is Arkansas Super Bowl more often than not during their years. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy. And what's wild as far as this matchup is concerned is that LSU needs this win far more than Arkansas does. Normally, it's the other way around, outside of course, the 2007 matchup where LSU needed it to go to the national championship. They were still able to get into the game because, as many of you know, 2007 was chaotic. But more often than not, Arkansas is not really playing for anything, and LSU is like an 8 or 9 win team, having already been beaten by Alabama. That's essentially been the scenario over the past decade. So, yes, it's been kind of an afterthought game for a lot of LSU fans. But in this case, it's the opposite. Arkansas has already exceeded expectations, and they've already reached that magical number of 6. So they know that they're probably not going to go to an Elite Bowl game, but a win doesn't do a whole lot as far as increasing whichever bowl that they go to, especially considering they still have Missouri left on the schedule, who I think they're going to win. So I think Arkansas feels pretty good about getting to at least 7 wins, even though they play at Alabama next week. LSU, look, I know LSU gets ULM next week, which would put them at 5 wins, but I don't think people quite understand how embarrassing it would be, and I would feel so bad for the guys in the locker room for not getting to 6 wins. And if LSU doesn't beat either Texas A&M or Arkansas we will be under 500 for the first time in a very, very long time. So, yes, you've been looking at the not only the series, LSU versus Arkansas, but the stat matchup between the two programs. And look, LSU was a different team last week, but let's not understate how much not having film on the new look LSU defense factored into LSU's success versus Arkansas. I don't think people quite understand how difficult it is for an offense to function going up against a defense that showed absolutely zero of the looks that the Alabama offense saw on film leading up to the game. So Arkansas, which does a good job preparing for their opposition, will have film and be more prepared for what LSU is going to throw at them. That might not mean it's not going to work. It's just that LSU is going to have to switch things up again. That's the key to winning games in the SEC. These coaches are so good that they're really good at adjusting, and quite simply, Ed Orgeron has been the absolute worst at that. So, yeah, you can't just do what you did versus Alabama because Kendall Browse is going to be able to figure that out. I also do think, and I know this is going to sound wild, but I could see a big bounce back game for Max Johnson. I do like the way LSU's wide receivers match up versus this Arkansas secondary. And I do think, despite the team not being that good this year, the guys are still playing hard. I think a bowl game means a lot to them. So I don't know if effort is necessarily going to be an issue for LSU in this one. So normally that is a concern, but I do think LSU is going to try their tails off to try and get to a bowl game where other Arkansas matchups, once again, you had the Bama hangover. Well, after that Bama hangover, the season was kind of decided. We were going to go to a very good bowl game. Now the season is not decided. LSU really needs this game. So motivation is, they don't need this game, but it would be very comforting knowing that you don't have to worry about bowl eligibility because you have ULM around the corner and that would get you to 6 wins. So yes, do I actually do the bold thing and actually pick LSU, even though they are 3-point underdogs? And look, the weather looks to be fantastic in Baton Rouge. I actually am going to pick LSU. I actually do like the way LSU matches up in certain aspects of this game. Arkansas's got some really good players in their front seven, but I still think LSU will be able to run the football some. So I am going to go LSU to win this game. I also would not be shocked if this is a lower scoring game as well. Final score here, LSU 21, Arkansas 20, game-winning field goal like Cade York, much like Josh Jasper in overtime. And who can forget the Chad Jones or Joe Adams hit? There's so many great LSU Arkansas things we could bring up, but hopefully LSU finds a way to win. 21-20, that's kind of a weird game-winning field goal situation, but it's going to happen. The score is going to be 18-20. We'll win 21-20. Hope you enjoyed this film study. We will only do a post-game chat for this weekend, so we will see you there. Don't forget about the Greek Amphitheater meetup. It is Power Hour LSU Bomb. We're doing burgers tonight. Let's go.